right, guys. Hey, welcome to Recon Angling Live. We're joined here with a few people tonight. We're here with Wyoming Game and Fish Biologists to my right here, John Walrath, and then Rob Keith over here. We also have the owner of Buckboard Marina, Tony Valdez. We got quite a few things to go over tonight. Really touchy but important topic to go over tonight. With you guys. Lots of information that we're going to be pumping out. So those of you who aren't able to watch live, this will be streaming on YouTube and it will be saved to the Facebook page where you guys can go and watch it at your own leisure as well. If you got questions throughout, go ahead and post in the comment section. If we have time, we'll get to them. We've gone over a lot of comments that you guys have had on the various posts that we've done. So we're going to kind of dive right into it. I'm going to hand the mic over to Tony, the owner of Buckboard, and he just wants to go over a few things with you guys, and we'll dive right into it.
First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for showing up and participating in this podcast. One thing I'd like to go over is, just the necessity for this meeting to basically educate people on what the biologists are trying to do, and we're here to support them all we can. As a sportsman and as the marina owners, we want to support anything they can do to help the situation, because it is an upcoming situation, we feel, and Rob and John can explain it way better than I can. But I would like to thank everybody for showing up or participating in this, because it is overdue. So yeah.
All right, well,
and I'm gonna disappear. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, so got a lot to discuss tonight with you guys about Flaming Gorge, pups and lake trout. It's a very touchy subject for anglers, but you guys kind of have a cool job, right? Because not only you guys, the biologists, and help, in conjunction with Utah working on the lake here, you guys also are outdoorsmen and fishermen as well. I've went out last week with you, Rob, and fished for a little bit. And so it's kind of a good, combination. So you hear, there's a lot of stigma, right? Like, oh, the biologists don't know what they're talking about. They need to go out there and fish and do stuff like that. Well, you're out there fishing too, and seeing what's going on and seeing how your work directly affects, being a sportsman and a biologist. And I think that's an important factor, for people to understand is, we all want the same thing, right? We all want, healthy kokanee here at the gorge. We all want, a healthy population of small lake trout that can grow into the trophies that everybody wants to come and catch. And in order to do that, you have to have a balanced fishery, and that's where you guys come into play.
Right, I've got over 25 years experience both working and fishing Flaming Gorge, and have enjoyed thousands and thousands of hours fishing for smallmouth back in the day, lake trout, kokanee. I mean, I'm out there as much as anybody. So definitely have both perspectives to understand the biology, understand what's going on with the reservoir, and what we need to continually try to maintain the balance, but also the recreational part.
So, diving into that, we still want lake trout in the lake, right?
Absolutely.
We're not devaluing lake trout. They're still a great, game fish to catch, to eat, but it's just trying to get that proper balance in the lake, right?
Part of what people need to understand is we have a really unique and great opportunity here in Flaming Gorge. The primary forage that these lake trout, at least the trophy lake trout, are utilizing is kokanee. The most important fishery currently in Flaming Gorge for the angler is kokanee. So we have a fishery where the forage is kokanee, anglers want kokanee there to fish for. We've got to have a large enough kokanee population to support both. And the big picture problem we have right now is we have much too large of a lake trout population of small lake trout, less than 25 inches. And we've got several figures that John will go through here in a minute. Way too many small lake trout. Those small lake trout don't subsist on kokanee. They don't eat kokanee all the time. They eat them opportunistically. They're primarily eating zooplankton. But the large number eating a few kokanee becomes a lot of kokanee, and they can really impact the recruitment of kokanee into the fishery. We run the risk of them not even becoming adults, the kokanee, and becoming forage for the trophy lake trout.
Yeah, and so, to kind of get into that, some of the talking points, is there's an overpopulation essentially of those fish under 25 inches.
Correct.
And some of those fish are, they're mature.
Right.
And so they're not going to get any larger, but they're still eating, the smaller kokanee fry that are being planted, that are naturally reproducing.
Yep.
And, you have that larger population where, just to throw out a number, you have 200,000 of these fish that size, if they eat 2 or 3 kokanee a month, that adds up really quick if you do the numbers.
Right. And that's the concern. We've identified multiple spawning locations of the small lake trout that are 19 to 22 inches from the pipeline north, and Ryan in Utah would know where those spawning concentrations are down in Utah better than us. But there's these spawning concentrations of these sexually mature small lake trout that can hold 4,000 to 5,000 eggs per female, that are recruiting more lake trout into the fishery. And the kokanee as forage can't support that amount of predation is the issue. So we need to reduce the number of small lake trout, and ideally that's going to be through angler harvest. I mean, that's the most productive way to reduce those numbers, so that we can get an abundance of kokanee going again, have kokanee for the trophy lake trout, and have kokanee for the anglers to fish for.
Yeah, I know some people out there, are probably wondering, well, why don't you just put another forage fish in here? And, I know that's a conversation that we've had. And, from talking with Ryan, it was tried a few times. They looked like they put a sculpin in.
Right, Bear Lake sculpin, and they tried Bear Lake Cisco. And neither of those species persisted. But there's a bigger issue with introduction of a forage. Any forage we put in there is likely to be dependent on zooplankton to live. So now the kokanee, their primary food is zooplankton. We're going to put competition in there that's going to compete with the kokanee for that zooplankton. There's multiple examples around the country where well-meaning biologists have tried to introduce forage into a fishery where the forage was depleted, kokanee fishery, lake trout fishery, same kind of scenario, and have crashed the kokanee fishery because what they introduced was more efficient at eating zooplankton than the kokanee were, or they displaced the kokanee. And that's a risk that we're not willing to take. We introduce fish, we risk changing what's going on out there and risk the current kokanee fishery. We risk introducing disease, which could cause all kinds. There's just a lot of problems with those kind of introductions. The most productive way to move forward is to reduce predation, not by the bigger fish, not by the fish that are greater than 25 inches, but reduce the predation on kokanee by these smaller lake trout. We'll always have enough lake trout to recruit into the trophy size. So people need to remember, lake trout aren't a short-lived species.
No.
They live 20, 30 years or more. So once the lake trout has recruited into above 28 inches currently, one fish limit, most people don't harvest them. They're going to live for another 20, 30 years.
Yep.
We don't need that many to recruit annually to have a successful and popular trophy fishery.
One comment we just had here was from Robert. He said, what about removing the limit for Lakers under 26 inches? Is that something that's been discussed?
That's something that's been discussed, but there's, at this point, we're not comfortable going there just yet. There's not enough evidence to suggest that going to unlimited, we would necessarily get to the goal. And undoubtedly, there's a whole other camp out there that would be opposed to that kind of a proposal.
Yeah, and what that other camp, there's a lot of people, well, if you take all these pups out of here, there's not going to be, big fish in the future, but there's a lot of variables that go into that. A lot of these fish that are that size are actually matured, so they're not going to grow anymore anyway. And, that's something we discussed a little bit earlier in here. You guys, we got a PowerPoint to kind of go over all this stuff. You guys want to jump into that, or is there something you wanted to discuss before we jumped into that?
I think the PowerPoint would be good to jump into because that explains a lot of our concerns, the data that we're looking at, and why we're concerned with where we've been at. This situation hasn't just occurred. This has been evolving since the late 80s. The Kokanee population was first crashed, or at least substantially reduced by lake trout predation in the late 80s. Prior to the early 90s, we didn't stock Kokanee. The whole fishery was wild recruitment. The lake trout population got large enough that it suppressed that wild population, and we had to come in with supplemental stocking. And we've had to increase the supplemental stocking to our current level of, between the three agencies, of right around 1.6 million annually to maintain this fishery. We can no longer increase stocking. We don't have capacity. So we need to increase the survival of what we stock by reducing the predation on
it. And real quick too, there's a lot of, people out there, lake trout were stocked here, but correct me if I'm wrong, but lake trout were actually kind of worked their way down the water system initially, and then there were periods of stocking for lake trout, but primarily they came down the watershed. Is that correct?
That's correct. The original population of lake trout in Flaming Gorge got established from drift out of the Finger Lakes around Pinedale. Came down the system through Fontenelle, got in the reservoir, started reproducing, and established that original population. The department did make 2 plants of lake trout. I can't remember exactly how many, pretty small numbers of fish over the years, but really the population established itself.
Yeah, I think that's important, for a lot of, I didn't know that until a few months ago, because you go what you hear, right? Which is, lake trout were stocked here, and yes, they were, but originally they just came down their drainage system and established themselves here. And obviously, anything with char, once they're there, they're there.
Right.
It's almost impossible to get rid of them. Yeah. So, and we definitely love that the lake trout are here. And that's why, guys, we're having this conversation and trying to get this information out to you so you understand, the how and the why they're doing what they're doing, for you guys. And then, see, Eric says the problem is too many don't keep any. They always catch and release. Unless the fish will die. Yeah. So nothing will work unless all help out. Yeah. So Eric is essentially, saying, anglers need to do their part and help out, and especially, I know one of the creel surveys that you guys did, and I know it's in the PowerPoint, and we'll get to that, was, Kokanee anglers catch a lot of Pup Lake Trout. And so,
Pup Lake Trout.
we'll get into that too. And then the best way to catch them. Yeah, Robert. So I actually, there's if you go back on my YouTube channel, I did a beginner's guide to lake trout. So it is ice fishing gear, but you can use a lot of that stuff for open water. And then actually we were out last week with KSL Outdoors filming an episode on catching Pup Lake Trout. So those of you guys who are familiar with KSL, when that airs, they'll go over a lot of stuff in there as well. And then you guys, I believe, also have a couple videos on the Wyoming Game and Fish website that show how to catch lake pups as well.
Right, and the KSL show will air this Saturday.
Okay.
We do have several videos, and like you said, several of them are ice fishing videos, but the techniques work.
Yep.
And this time of year, from now until about mid-June, the people that aren't fortunate enough to have boats, great time to target lake trout just straight off the shore, throwing hardware. Great opportunity. You just need to be fishing the banks that are pretty close proximity to deeper water, and the lake trout are going to roll out.
Yep. And I've, real quick, I found, really good, weapon fishing wise is a white or green tube jig, and just cast out and work and let it sink to the bottom and work your way back. You catch a lot of fish, lake trout, smallmouth and rainbows doing that. But yeah, this time of year, working from the bank, anything that's going to get your lure off the bottom on those steep drops is going to work. So before we get into anything else, we'll take Ryan's question here. He wants to know if there's any smokehouses that will take your catch. Would be good for businesses to get info up there. I don't believe there is anything. But you can smoke them yourself.
Right.
And we'll get into that a little bit later. But we're going to hop into the PowerPoint presentation. So we'll get that up, and John will kind of walk us through that. So we got the first slide here, which looks like we're going to play some music or something, John. I don't know if you want to walk us through what that is.
I know some of these are going to hopefully bring a little bit more information to a lot of the topics that have already been touched on here, and provide a little bit more background on how we got to where we are. And each of these, there might be just a little bit more information we'll have to provide, because some of them are kind of busy, and we're gonna break them down as best we can and relay the big points, big takeaways from all of these. So this first figure here is basically showing you all of the trend data that we have just looking at lake trout. So our netting hasn't changed sites or timing for all of our small lake trout, which we call that, those are less than 28 inches. That netting's been the same all the way back to 1983. So that's longer than I am old.
Yeah,
so,
me too.
So that's a long-term net data set right there. And then all of our trophy lake trout, those that are greater than 28 inches, that netting's been happening the same since 1990. So just a little bit younger than what I am. But both of these data sets, great big term, long-term picture to look at to get a general idea of what's going on with the trophy lake trout. Those are the black circles that are on there, that the music sheet there on the top. Okay. And then the triangles there on the bottom, that's what is our small lake trout catch rate. And, the other big thing here is this is reservoir wide. This includes netting that happens in Wyoming and in Utah. So everything boiled together, this is what we get. And one of the big things that, we should really take away from this is, there was a trophy lake trout fishery in 1990. When we first started, it was already here. Those trophy lake trout were already recruiting the anglers. The anglers were already catching them. And our abundance of small lake trout was lower than what we have now. And, a lot of the mentality was, you release a small fish because it's going to grow into and be a trophy fish. Like that was the mentality.
Yep.
And not that was wrong, but it's like, looking at this, if all those fish were released and still being released now, we would expect to see the abundance of trophy fish increase. And this data doesn't show that. So then we start running down the lines of, well, why aren't we seeing more trophy lake trout if we have more small lake trout? And hopefully, future slides here will help paint that picture of why we might not see that instance occur.
Yeah, you can see a pretty good correlation, especially the last few years with, the number of big fish and then, with the catch rate of the smaller ones as well.
Absolutely. And on the next one, this is the exact same information. What we've done here, though, is we've split this out by our management regions. So basically what's in Wyoming is what we call the inflow and then the open hills. And that border is basically right below Buckboard here, that Big Bend area. Once you get down towards Brinnegers, that's what starts, the open hills. And then what's considered the canyon starts at Boar's Tusk, right there across the Utah border.
Okay.
So that's basically, the canyon is basically all the Utah netting data. And then the Wyoming end is the inflow and open hills data combined. And, given this is the same information, the big takeaway here is that, when you look at the canyon set there on the bottom, there's a lot of variability there in the data set, but, overall, they've maintained a higher abundance of trophy lake trout and a low abundance of small lake trout. There hasn't been a whole lot of big changes occurring there. Whereas you look on our end of the reservoir up in the inflow, right above Buckboard here, or Buckboard and above, that top portion of that figure shows a very drastic decrease in the presence of trophy lake trout, and then the most extreme increase in the abundance of small lake trout. Where you see there's an opposite reaction there of their abundances. And then in that open hills area, the middle of the reservoir, it's kind of what we'd expect to see. It's in between those two extremes. So you put that all together and you get the figure that we saw first, where you see a gradual decrease in trophy lake trout and a slow increase in small lake trout.
When you look at where it was, where it was and where it is now, it's still, each one is minus the canyon, each one for trophy fish has gone down significantly.
It has, yes.
So we'll go on to the next slide here.
Yeah, this gets into some really good information as far as what do we see on the age of lake trout that are out there and how big they are. How fast are the lake trout growing? And, the stand-on study that was completed was done by Yule, a graduate student in 1992. That was like the best age and growth analysis that was completed on lake trout for the reservoir. And you can see that, that figure is represented by the black line and the big black circles on there. So you can see that about the time that lake trout hit 7 years of age, they were basically moving into that trophy fish category. They were about 28 inches, and then they were in that more conservative regulation limit. There was only one over 28. So they only were in, that higher harvest limit area for 7 years, really. Not a very long period of time. And jump forward to, we did some age and growth work again in 2016, and those are the light circles there. And that same 7-year-old fish is now only about 20 inches.
Yeah.
And, if we tried how long does it take for him to move into a trophy size, just based on this information, you drag your finger across at 28 over there, you're looking at 13, 14 years old. So it's taking them twice as long to even move into that trophy category. So that's a red flag right there of what is causing these lake trout to slow down their growth so much, and yet, not really putting the pounds on. What's changed from 1992 to 2016? That was the first red flag that we had of there's something going on here, and we need to figure this out in order to save the trophy lake trout fishery before they just age out and we have nothing to move into it. So this next one here, this is a part of some of the ongoing research that we do have going on in the reservoir. So in 2020, we got our statewide biologist to carve out a good portion of his time to come and do some netting on the gorge. Seeing all of this increase in small lake trout out there, and then going out on our own time fishing, we started catching a whole bunch of these lake trout that were 15, 16, 17 inches. And they were starting to account for a good portion of our catch. And yet they weren't really necessarily showing up in our netting data the same rate at which we were catching them. So we were concerned that our netting techniques weren't capturing those fish. And given how long it was taking for them to reach a size that we could net them, we thought we should do some additional netting to figure out if we need to change the net size that we use to capture them when they're smaller and have a better idea of the year classes coming up. So we can maybe get them, instead of catching them when they're 6 or 7 years old, where they've been in the system for that long already. Now we can, by adding a gear, maybe see them when they're 4, 3, 4, 5 years old, when we have an idea of what's coming up. So this is a product of some of that research. And if we jump forward to another one, this is the same kind of a figure just from this year, where basically it's the number of fish that were caught for all these different lengths of fish. And what we can see is that the pattern is kind of the same. From 2020, 21, we have the highest abundance of those like 18 to 22 inch fish. And then basically once they hit 23, 24 inches, catch drops off. And then we kind of have this low level of lake trout that are in that 25, 26, 27, all the way into the trophy fish category. So that's another one of these flags of there's like a maximum size some of our lake trout are reaching, and they just physically cannot move into and will not move into the trophy category because they don't have the potential to anymore. So this one will move us into some of our Kokanee data. This works. All the hydroacoustic work, that's completed by Utah, Ryan Mosley, and getting their hydroacoustics boat up here to give us an estimate of, really fancy fish sonar equipment. It's basically what it is. How many 0, 1, and 2-year-old Kokanee do we have out there as a way to predict what anglers might see a year or two down the road. And the red line on there, that's basically the total number of Kokanee that have been stocked in the reservoir since it started. And, the big takeaway here is, I got to pull up my cheat sheet here and look at some years because that's a little bit small. But basically, once we really started ramping up our Kokanee stocking, that would have been in, say, 2011, 2013, right in there.
So right where you see that red line shoot up.
Right where you see that red line shooting up, that's when we started getting our stocking rates increased to the level in which we kind of see it kind of plateau there. We're actually reaching that 1.6 million Kokanee, which was our management objective. There were a lot of years there where we never really met our management objective, but we did hit it there starting in like 2013, 2014. And you see this really nice reaction to the Kokanee abundance estimates where the bars on the bottom there track that increase in stocking. And then the more concerning thing is that our stocking has been maintained at a relatively high level, hitting that 1.6 million, but yet we're also seeing a decrease in the kokanee abundance estimates. And there's a variety of things that could be. The two biggest ones would be predation, and then the other one would be a poor natural recruitment.
And you guys have also looked at, the fish that you are stocking. I'm sure some people out there, we always see you stocking them at the ramps, but you are trying out different places to help cut down on that predation as well.
Yeah, and we do try to push back the stocking dates so that, the lake trout really do crash the boat ramps where fish get stocked early on in the year, because they know those trucks are coming. The water's cold. They're there. Later on in the year, that water warms up, and the lake trout do push off into that cooler, deeper water. So we try to have those hatchery trucks come later, but our hatchery facilities can't handle the number of fish that we're stocking in the gorge. A lot of times, those facilities are at capacity and over capacity in the early springtime, and they simply have to offload fish before they start losing entire lots of fish.
Yeah.
So they kind of need to bring those fish when they're available and at the size, so that they can actually have them to stock instead of losing the whole lot and putting fewer fish out there. So yeah, we do try to push them back, and we try to spread out multiple boat ramps, not putting all of our fish in one location, so that those fish don't get really trained up for this is the only spot we're going to go to.
Yep.
We try to maximize the number of boat ramps that we use to spread those fish out in the reservoir.
And I would inject that if people are interested in, they're shore anglers, you can fish close to the ramps, not on the ramps, mind you, but in proximity to the ramps, basically from mid-May through about the first part of June, and lake trout will get stacked up. The small ones will get stacked up close to those ramps. And you want to stay out off the actual ramp itself because people are launching, but get within 100 yards or so of the ramps on either side can be a real good opportunity to target lake trout, the small lake trout, mind you.
Let's see, going to the next one here.
Yeah, and this is more of that hydroacoustics data. It's just, again, it's broken down by the regions. And, this one gets kind of into the weeds a little bit, but I think the big takeaway is that, that we had the highest abundance of kokanee in the upper end of the reservoir, which isn't unexpected given that's where a lot of the productivity takes place, where the Blacks Fork and the Green River are coming in. There's a lot of productivity to happen. So naturally, that's where a lot of kokanee are going to want to hang out, is where that productivity takes place. The other thing is that, the biggest change in lake trout in the kokanee abundance has probably occurred in that open hills region, that middle of the reservoir, that we really see on this graph kind of that sharp decline in the abundance of kokanee in the middle of the reservoir. And there's not a clear answer for that as far as why we see that, but the data shows that it is occurring in the middle of the reservoir, and there's something going on there that's worth looking into.
And so what this, from just me looking at this, it also as well as, going back to those first charts that we were looking at where it showed the massive amounts of smaller fish up in that inflow area. Now you're seeing that's where most of your salmon is, so you got both of these two graphs that directly correlate to, those kokanee crashes that you're seeing, because, you have too many of the predator prey hanging out in the same area is what I'm taking away from this. And is that kind of how you guys are feeling?
Well, it's one of those things of, fish aren't necessarily dumb.
Yeah.
They're going to go where the food is.
Yep.
And they're going to try to exert the least amount of energy to get their food. So they're going to be where the food is.
Yep.
Well, the other thing to understand here is all the netting that this data is reflecting is done in early to mid-May. So what the data we're showing you is across the reservoir, what the populations look like in that window. And as we all know, as you progress into the summer, the lake trout and the kokanee aren't hanging in the inflow anymore. They slowly work their way down the reservoir. So.
Go on to the next one here.
Yeah, this one's going to be a little more challenging to describe, but we should make people aware of the fact, or maybe they are aware that Buckboard Marina has been sponsoring the can't remember the name of it now.
Population control contest.
Yes, the population control. Yeah, where we go out every fall and tag 100 fish with a visual tag that anglers can see on the outside of the fish. So that's been happening for 3 years. So 19, 20, and 21, we tagged 100 lake trout with a green, an orange, and a pink tag on it.
So 300 total.
300 total lake trout are out there right now, minus the few that have been captured. But essentially, yeah, there's a little over 275 fish out there that have a tag in them. And basically, a good reason to do this was to help us figure out, one, where are fish moving to once we tag them in the fall? Where are people catching them? How far do they move? Are they in tight little bays and never move? Or are they moving 50 miles up reservoir in a short period of time? That's a lot of good information to have to start painting this picture of what's going on with lake trout. And then, the other thing is based on the recaptures, we can get an idea of, just how many small lake trout do we really have out there? By orders of magnitude, do we have 50,000 out there? Do we have 100,000, 500,000? We can kind of get a glimpse of that just by looking at the number of fish that we tagged and then the number of fish that we get from anglers returned. The Valdez's, they have a high reward on all these fish. $100 for same year fish and $50 for any fish that's from a previous year. And that's, I don't know about you, but if I caught one of those fish, I'd be about guaranteed to turn that information in.
Yeah, I think it's only $20 to enter too, and so $20 entry gets you, into that. To not only are you out there catching smaller lake trout, helping the fishery out, but you can also, make a little bit of money to fill half your boat up now, with $100. So you can, those of you guys that have big boats probably fill about half of it up, but it's better than spending all your money out there fishing. So yeah, it's a good program that's going on, and it also allows you guys to, even though it's a small number or a small percentage of fish, it still gives you an idea of where those fish are going and kind of what their habits are. And I'm guessing that helps you, when you do future studies, to kind of help you, tweak those studies as well, as we were talking about earlier, changing the size of your net and stuff like that. Like, all of that stuff, I would guess, works together in an ever-evolving process of keeping up with the fish in the lake.
Exactly. It's a lot of work to just go into a project blind without having an idea of what you really need to put into it. So a lot of these small efforts pay big dividends when you're planning a larger project.
So we'll go on to the next slide, and I got this in full screen, so I can't see comments if you guys are posting them. But if you do have comments while we're talking, go ahead and post them. Once we're done with the slideshow, we'll kind of go back if we have time and look over some comments and questions as well. So moving on to the next one, and this is I think it's a really good study, and it's a study that if you guys punch it in Google, you guys can actually pull this up and download it and read it yourself as well. And it is with fishing, they say, if you're using a lure or you're doing something that happens once, it could be a fluke. It happens twice, so it could be luck. But 3 times or more, you kind of get a pattern. And I think that's what this study shows is. It wasn't just 1 or 2 lakes that experienced these same things, but the majority, if not all of these western lakes there are these flooded reservoirs that have lake trout and kokanee all experience the same boom and crash. And, from reading this, my opinion on this, for what it's worth, is, there's a lot for us here that we can, what happened in Colorado and some of the other states, we can kind of, hey, that happened over here. We're seeing the telltale signs of that. Let's try to do this now so we don't experience the full collapse of the lake. And that's, my thoughts, that's where you guys are getting at with the targeting of this size fish, is to, we don't want the lake to crash, and we don't want to go to some of the extremes these other places have had to go on with commercial netting and stuff like that, because that really, that's a whole different animal, with that commercial, because the lake is can be, as far as sport fishing goes, it can have a negative impact for many years before it rebounds. And so we're kind of just before that precipice. Is that kind of where we're at right now? We're trying to combat that so we don't have that crash, and, learn from these other lakes from their mistakes so we don't make them here.
I like to think of it as like an ounce of prevention.
Yeah.
We're trying to do a little bit of work on the front end here in hopes of staving off, a crash in the kokanee population, because, we didn't act soon enough when the warning signs were there that we could be headed to that precipice of too many lake trout and crashing the kokanee and losing basically the whole fishery. So yeah, we're trying to be preemptive here and do what we can before we're reactive and too late.
So the biologists down in Colorado, Blue Mesa, did some really good work, really good research looking at, of the lake trout in the lake, what lake trout, what sizes were consuming the most kokanee. And what they found, and part of why we're so concerned here, is that it wasn't the teenage size lake trout or the trophy size lake trout, not those 10 pounders or the 20s or the 30s that were consuming the most lake trout or most kokanee. It was this group that we're targeting, this less than 25-inch group, that it wasn't that the individual fish, like we talked earlier, wasn't the individual fish were eating a lot of lake trout. It was the sheer number of them eating some lake trout that was just knocking out the recruitment on the kokanee before it ever had a chance to become part of the population. And once, in like Blue Mesa, once they didn't have kokanee for the trophy lake trout to eat, the trophy lake trout condition just went completely. And, so we are trying to stay ahead of this and trying to encourage everybody just to, harvest a few more lake trout little ones than you did before, and just contribute, help the situation.
On that too, on that Blue Mesa, I mean, they did do a pretty robust, I guess, removal effort on those young juvenile lake trout, and their kokanee population responded.
Mm-hmm. Responded really well.
That responded really well, and they were able to do egg takes again from their kokanee, so they can spawn those kokanee and take those eggs and stock them in other reservoirs in Colorado. So that was a good example of how suppression of a specific size class of lake trout can have a pretty quick reward for even the kokanee population.
Yeah, and even on the trophy fish, I follow a lot of groups and stuff on Facebook, and I saw a lot of guys at Blue Mesa this year catch Flaming Gorge size fish at Blue Mesa again.
Right.
I remember, 8-10 years ago, Blue Mesa and Flaming Gorge were neck and neck for, if you wanted to catch that 40-inch blimp of a lake trout, right? You went to Flaming Gorge or Blue Mesa in the lower 48. And Blue Mesa kind of faded away. But, this last winter especially, I've seen a lot of guys catch some really healthy fish. There was one fish there, I believe that was like 36 pounds, and it was only, I think, 41 inches. And so it was just a blimp of a fish, and you could tell by looking at it. it was a younger fish too, and so that kind of is just living proof that this stuff can work if it's done right. But there's a stigma out there of, especially with lake trout, since they do live so long, that you have to throw them back in order for them to get big, which, you do, but it's all about the proper size of the fish. And that's where I get kind of passionate is, and we do these, and I appreciate you guys coming on and sharing your input, because there's a lot of people that don't know, and they just know what they heard, and so now I hope, as we continue with this, we're getting information out to the guys to where it's not just, oh, we think, or we, I think it's, this is what our data is telling us, and if you look at data and stuff, it's, unless you're in there, faking numbers, data typically doesn't lie. As a fishing guide, I rely on data all the time with, barometric pressure, weather, wind, all that stuff. I keep track of all that stuff, and it helps me factor in of how the fish are going to behave. You guys use your data to see how the fishery is behaving with the number of fish, and there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. So it's not just one thing here or there. It's a cumulative effort of data, and you're not just sitting there behind your computer punching in numbers. I mean, you guys are out here not only as sportsmen, but you're out here as biologists too, like studying and crunching numbers and taking a whole lot of stuff in and listening to fishermen as well. I think that's a major misconception is a lot of guys, the biologists just think they know everything. Well, anybody that's good at their job doesn't pretend to think they know everything, right? But you know what you know. And so I just felt like it was important to kind of get that out there as we're talking about this, because I know from living in Colorado during that time how unpopular it was with them taking those fish out. I mean, I saw the forums and everything else like that, how unpopular it was, but now you're seeing that fishery start pumping out fish where you got guys in Denver driving, 4 or 5 hours. They're not going to Granby because, while you can still catch good fish at Granby, you're not going to go catch, a 30, 40 pound lake trout out of Granby. You'll get 20, 25 pound fish, but a 30 pound fish is like a 50 pound fish is here. Super rare, so it's, and another thing, with this is not every lake is going to be the same as far as the size of fish that needs to come out either. That's where a lot of people have a misconception. A lot of guys will come here from Colorado, thinking that releasing a 20-inch fish here is the same as releasing a 20-inch fish in Colorado, and it's just not the case. Those 20-inch fish here should be kept. And, a lot of guys that come fish the burbot bash, how many people fishing the burbot bash or fishing for kokanee catch these small, release them and getting bigger. But, as you guys have kind of said with your data, that's kind of not the right answer of what needs to be done. So.
Yeah, it might not necessarily be helping the situation any.
Yeah. So let's get into this Western lake trout woes. We'll take a brief second here to see if there's any comments here. We got quite a few here. Let's see what. Ethan wants to know, would the people that work on the gorge fish stocking ever put another good bait fish in there like Cisco? Yeah, Ethan, so we discussed that earlier in the show. They tried to do Cisco and stuff like that. They just never took here. And that just opens up a big can of worms, and we went over that a little bit earlier. I don't know if there's anything you guys want to expand on that.
Not really. No.
All right. And then let's see, stocking a walleye, that's not going to happen. That's, you want to stock another fish in here that's a predator when you have a predator prey problem. You're not going to solve anything.
Yeah, we just don't have the appropriate forage to maintain a walleye population. And if we want to keep the fishery that we have, lake trout, kokanee, rainbows, we're not going to want to introduce a species that's going to totally disrupt that. I mean, the Platte River lake or reservoirs right now are struggling because the walleye populations are basically eating all the rainbows that we're trying to stock to maintain a rainbow fishery for that portion of the angling public that's what they like to do. And those biologists over there are really struggling in most of those reservoirs because the walleye are eating everything that's good. Yep. So we don't want to be putting walleye. And we hope there are no, bucket biologists out there that think that's going to be a good thing for this reservoir, because it just isn't.
Yeah, I mean, just like putting bourbon in here.
Yeah.
That you look at a lot of these studies that show just what the lake trout are doing, and it's kind of scary because it doesn't account for what the bourbon are eating, right?
Right.
And so that's a whole other unaccounted animal out there, that is, so it's, bucket biology is, if you got your own pond out in the back, go ahead and do what you want to do. But, there's guys here that they pour their life's work into trying to maintain fisheries like this and that make it a fishery that's good for everybody, not just one or two people.
Right.
So let's get into this study here. You want me to go to the next slide, or?
No, I guess the point of including this slide was just trying to refer people to find this paper. Like Shane said, you can Google Western Lake Trout woes. It's going to come up immediately. You can download it or print it and read it. And this is one of the papers when this came out, and with what we were seeing on the reservoir, that really, really concerned us. I wanted to make the point that back in the 80s and the 90s, we already had an inkling that we were headed in this direction. But the Trophy Lake Trout anglers were a dominant force in the reservoir, and they wanted to have nothing to do with harvest of lake trout. And that was partly as an agency our fault, because in that window was the big catch and release. Catch and release is great in appropriate fisheries that's needed. But some fisheries, we need harvest. And we've all learned that through the years. The thing that's really interesting is we went through the 90s, just slowly raised limits and changed configurations of our limits down here, taking lake trout out of the aggregate with the other trout so that we could get a little bit more harvest on them. And as we got into about the mid 2000s, we were starting to see this large group of small fish, some of which appeared to be really quite old, looked really sickly, big head, really thin body, especially in that November, December window after the spawn, seeing alarming numbers of these fish. Anglers were seeing it too. And so as we started to talk about, hey, we really need to try to reduce the competition in these smaller fish, we need to start removing them. And we started slowly but surely increasing the limits until we got finally to where we were at. Now, we didn't get a lot of opposition because the folks that were out there fishing, they were seeing exactly what our data was showing, exactly what we were seeing when we were out there on our own time angling. And so most everybody, not everybody, but most everybody was getting it and came along with us to get us to where we're at right now. But now you look at that first graph we showed, there looks like maybe there's a little stabilization or a little decrease in lake trout. And it's going to take several more years before we're going to call it a trend.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a long time before we're going to be like, we're there. We need to continue to keep reducing these numbers. One of the big groups out there that really needs to start participating, ice anglers are great. Not everybody, but a lot of people are harvesting during ice season. Our Kokanee anglers have the most to lose in this game. They need to step up, and they have been. We've seen a pretty significant increase, which I think we'll get to here in a moment, from 2013 to the present, of Kokanee anglers harvesting more little lake trout while they're out there fishing for Kokanee. But they need to step up more, because all of us that fish for Kokanee know while you're trolling around, boom, 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 you got 3 or 4 little lake trout in the same day that you get your Kokanee. So you need to harvest those fish.
Yeah, and that's, that brings up a good thing too, because, up here on the table, we have, canned Kokanee here in this one, and then canned Pup Lake Trout. And minus the oil difference, you really can't, it's kind of hard to tell the difference. And a lot of these smaller lake trout are really good table fare because they're eating the same thing that the Kokanee are eating, that plankton. And so you'll notice when you fillet these smaller fish that they're, that orangish pink and neat color, and they are actually really good. I don't like eating trout a whole lot personally, but I like eating salmon, and these smaller lake trout are actually really good.
Right. And a lot of people like them, and it always amazes me because I like Kokanee.
Yeah.
It always amazes me the people that we get in this very discussion with them, and are like, I like those little lake trout better than I like Kokanee.
Yep.
And it's just like, wow.
Yeah.
We're good,
Yeah. So here, kind of goes over what you were talking about with the, species targeted in the blue, rainbow trout, red lake trout, yellow salmon, and then you have the bass there. And that was done in, looks like 2003.
Yeah, this is a good first snapshot of a creel that was done in 2003. Correct me if I'm wrong, that was a year-long
Yep, it's a year-long creel
survey. So this is everything boiled down January 1, December 31, and just showing that the dominant angler out there, they were targeting rainbows.
Yep.
And when they weren't targeting rainbows, they were primarily targeting Kokanee and then lake trout. Jump forward to the next one there. That should be another snapshot from a creel survey that was done 10 years later, or almost 10 years ago from now. So a decade later, we see a huge swing where the dominant angler out there was targeting Kokanee. And then we see that sharp decline where basically we lost a lot of those rainbow anglers. They switched over to the Kokanee.
Yep.
And then, for other reasons, you see decreases in the smallmouth bass anglers, and then, lake trout anglers. And then we threw on there, we kind of broke out the Trophy Lake Trout anglers and the lake trout anglers at that time to really get an idea of how many people were specifically targeting trophies. But the big takeaway, Kokanee. Kokanee was king out here for the majority of the summer. So naturally, that's what Sportsmen wanted. That's what they were targeting. So that's what we were trying to continue to provide to the anglers.
So people need to understand. So the previous slide was a year-long creel. This creel was mid-May to mid-August. So it's basically a summer creel. And so that reflects what the anglers were targeting in the summer. And if you included it, the next slide should be a 6-week creel, January through about the end of March. Was it the middle of March?
So yeah, ice fishing, it really looks like it switches, late season ice fishing, lake trout and bourbon.
Exactly,
And rainbows.
And we still see that.
Yeah.
That was done in 2013, and that's still true today, where we get a substantial amount of our lake trout harvest occurs on the ice during winter. And some of this, we'll go on to the next one there. We should have some breakdowns as far as where our folks are coming from.
Angler resident,
Yeah, so this is from that summertime creel in 13, where we see basically the dominant anglers on the gorge are Wyoming and Utah, but the stronger majority are coming from Utah. So we get a few other, not quite a quarter there, an eighth of the graph or whatever, are people that are specifically coming here from, or that aren't from Wyoming or Utah. Some of them are making great distance or big drives to come here and specifically target normally Kokanee or Trophy Lake Trout is what they're coming here for.
Yeah, I'd say even this last year, there was just as many boats from California as there was from Wyoming and Utah this summer out here. So and they're coming as all they care about is the Kokanee.
That's all they do. Yeah, they drive all that way just to go catch, at the time, three Kokanee.
Yep.
Is what they came here for. And then on the next one here, this is the same information, but just from our winter creel. And you see we've completely flip-flopped where the majority of the people ice fishing are from Wyoming.
That's because I-80's closed.
No one can get here.
But yeah, it's, what do most of us in Wyoming like to fish for? Lake trout. That's, a lot of the trophy guys through the ice. And so that makes sense.
Yeah. So this just kind of shows that, our data tracks what's really happening out there and it is representative of what we see. And then, we still see a whole bunch of people coming from all these other states that account for a small portion of that even in wintertime, it's still a destination fishery for folks.
There's some proof.
Yeah, this is a good little photo collage to show that, this might not be representative of every single small lake trout that's out there, but, folks that are able to see this and blow it up on their computers all the way. I mean, how many lake trout are on here? I mean, that's just eight or so fish. And, there's some of those that have 6, 7 kokanee in their stomachs, or some of them are eating a kokanee that's 8 inches long, and they themselves aren't all that long. So you can just imagine that even if a very small portion of these small lake trout are doing this for even 2 weeks out of the year or every other day, I mean, that would have a substantial impact on the kokanee fishing.
Yeah, and you can see here, I mean, they're not big fish either. That's right in that. This one here looks like it's 19 inches, and most of these are about the same size. So a lot of anglers that are out there, and we've done a lot with guys too, where they like, oh, look what was inside this, and we have them send them these pictures, so that way we can send them to you guys. And then that helps you, kind of as well, when you're doing, because we kept, this year we kept a couple 26-inch fish and didn't really have a whole lot in their stomachs. And then we caught some 22, 23-inch fish, and they were the ones that had 2 or 3 rainbows. Or this year we've seen a lot of fish with burbot in their stomach. And I know there was a gentleman that posted a question of, if we take out a bunch of these Pup Lake Trout, is that going to allow the burbot to kind of reproduce? But, I guess it's a double-edged sword that these fish are eating burbot now. It's good they're eating burbot, but also, is it a sign that there's no other predominant food source for them to eat and they've switched over to burbot? Or, is it a little bit of both?
It could be. And that is concerning to us. It could be a sign that that's what's available, so that's what they're eating. But I think, and I'm hoping that it's also a matter that when burbot first showed up and the populations peaked around 2010, 9, 10, 11, we didn't see burbot in lake trout. And my assumption of why that is because all the lake trout that were out in this reservoir that were really the piscivorous lake trout, the ones that eat fish, are all out in the deep water, and they're all looking up for silver stuff. They were not in the margins rooting around for something brown. And so we didn't see it. But in these last few years, so we've come ahead 10, 12 years from when burbot really became abundant. Now we have the fish that were juveniles living in the shore habitats overlapping with burbot that now are starting to get big enough. And it makes sense that they'd be eating a food source that they basically grew up with.
Yep. And that makes sense because we talked about this. This year I caught, last year I think 1 or 2 lake trout that had burbot in it. And this year I probably caught 8 or 9. And that's just me with clients that were in that, 15 to 20 pound range that had, 20-inch burbot hanging out of their mouth when we brought them in.
Yeah.
So that's something that I hadn't seen in that big of a number. So, for me being out there, it's, warning bells, or is it like, hey, this is good. But even with the burbot bass this year, you saw the average fish size for burbot was down quite a bit from what anglers were bringing in. And so, hopefully it's a good thing, right?
Oh yeah, it's a good thing. I have no concerns, and we can eventually get to another slide. I don't want to move off this slide just yet. That will show that the reduction in burbot that we've seen over the last 10 years isn't lake trout predation. Because like we already talked, we were seeing few to no burbot in lake trout back in the day. It coincides with going to unlimited harvest, with classifying burbot as a non-game species, and with all the effort by us, by Flaming Gorge Chamber, with the burbot bash to attract people to the reservoir to utilize the fishery. We're getting a lot of harvest on burbot.
Yep.
Are they going to ever go away? No, they're way too prolific, but we're keeping on top of them. And if we add on, hopefully, additional predation by these lake trout, we'll see them getting suppressed. We need the little lake trout that are out there that can grow to trophy size, but to do that, we need to get the abundance of small lake trout out there out of the way so the fish that have the genetics can grow. The point I wanted to make on this slide real quick, which was really alarming to me when I saw these, is the fish in the upper left there and the fish in the lower right. That lower right fish is 11 inches, and it has a kokanee in it. That upper left fish, Ryan would have to remind me, but that one's somewhere between 11 and 14 inches. The guy that's going up and down on that one, and it has a kokanee in it. So even really small lake trout, they're not day in, day out eating kokanee, but they're opportunistically, when a kokanee gets, makes a mistake, they're grabbing them and they're eating them.
Yeah, I mean, if this is an example of, 7 or 8 fish, it's not just these 7 or 8 fish that are doing this. I mean, you have these populations where it could be in the hundreds of thousands that are doing this, and it really adds up. Even if, you look at some of these, they have, 4, 5, 6 kokanee in there, even if they just had 1 or 2, and you multiplied that by those couple 100,000 in that population, I mean, that's really bad. And then you start seeing, big numbers of fish like this in there. And then, it does have a cause for concern because, you see it a lot in the ocean too. You have too many of one class fish, that whole thing collapses.
Right.
So, that's where I think this picture really drives home the fact that, you're not over here pumping numbers. I mean, this is a direct representation of the graphs that we talked about earlier, essentially.
Right. And people, I can't bring the message home enough, need to realize that when the Trophy Lake Trout was peaking, the first graph we showed, the small lake trout numbers were the lowest. It just isn't going to take that many small lake trout in this reservoir to help maintain a really good quality trophy fishery. And our goal is absolutely we're trying to serve all the anglers. We showed you who's coming, what they're targeting. We're trying to serve the trophy lake trout anglers. We're trying to serve the kokanee anglers. But to do that, we need to have an abundance of kokanee. Get there, we have to reduce the predation on them by the small lake trout.
Yeah, I mean, we had a blast the other day going out there.
Oh, yeah.
You know, between three boats, we got 77 lake trout, and you know, about 5-6 hours of fishing, and it was a great time, and you know, it wasn't really that hard to do.
Right.
You know, and so like Rob mentioned, that's going to be airing on KSL Saturday, so you guys you'll be able to watch that. But you know, there's opportunity. You know, those you guys that are fishing for big fish. You know, a lot of you guys go and fish kokanee and then go fish big fish. You know, throw a little bit of time in there to do your part. You know, if you want to catch those trophies, do your part. Go catch, even if it's you know, 1 or 2 little lake trout. You don't need to keep, you know, 10 or 12. You just get 1 or 2, and you do that each time you go out. Those numbers add up, just like the numbers of these lake trout eating the kokanee 1 or 2 at a time. You know, more and more people start doing it, you'll have the same effect on the lake trout that the lake trout are doing on the kokanee in themselves.
But by all means, if people want to harvest the limita pups,
Yeah.
please do it. And if I don't know if there's any folks from out of state that are watching, but part of the reason that we went on the small lake trout, that we went 12 per day, 24 in possession, is when people are traveling a long distance. They come up here for 3 or 4 days. They may catch 3 or 4 small lake trout a day. Over the course of that, they can legally harvest and take home up to 24 lake trout. That was the whole point of that, per person, to help. So those people that are inclined to harvest fish, that enjoy having that fish to eat when they get home, they have the opportunity, and they're helping the fishery. The folks that fish, the locals, the non-residents, everybody that come to fish kokanee and let every little lake trout go, they're not helping at all.
You know, I'll say too that, you know, a lot of those guys that were coming from out of state, you know, they made a lot of reference. You go walk around and talk to folks, you know, ask them where they're from. There are a lot of guys be like, man, we've just had a whole week here, just phenomenal fishing, and we let all of our fish go. And I was perplexed, and I would ask them why. And they said, well, because they were basically all lake trout, and we're going home tomorrow, so we're going to catch our limit tomorrow and just keep those. Back when it was 8 fish, I mean, they were confident they were going to catch their fish on the very last day. But had they had the regulation in place that we have now, yeah, Rob's right. I mean, they could have easily been going home with a whole lot of fish. It was a big family. And, you know, that wasn't an isolated case. And there's a lot of people that would come for multiple days, but then be limited when they went back home. They traveled 1,000 miles and could go home with 3 kokanee and 1 trout and 8 lake trout. Whereas now, I mean, yeah, they can go home with a lot more lake trout, and it's worth their time to come all that way and rewarding to them.
What we got on the next? This is the
This
last one.
is the burbot slide I was referring to that
Okay.
John will walk us through.
Passing the buck.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, touching on the whole burbot discussion again here, I mean, we didn't really get them, or actually 2006 was the first year we detected them in the gorge.
In our nets, yeah.
In the nets. There was some netting done prior. 2006 was the first year we actually found them with some nets in the gorge. And then that our netting in Wyoming is reflected by the 2 upper lines there. And that green line there, that's overall reservoir wide. What do we see?
Okay.
So looking at the first 4, you know, data points there of the green, you kind of get this picture of there was a upward trend in the abundance of burbot out there, which is typically what you see when a new species comes into the environment. There's a population explosion as the environment adjusts to their presence. Fisheries isn't secluded in that. I mean, there's lots of things where that happens, and we see that. What happened in, you know, that whole period, and by 2010 is what Rob said, there was a lot of regulation changes that took place. There was a lot of outreach that occurred to try to get anglers out there There were derbies that were firing up. And we see as a response a non-existence to the continued increase in the abundance of burbot. And what we see is since 2010 all the way to where we are now, burbot have been maintained at this lower population level. And, you know, as we mentioned, it's like that wasn't necessarily a reflection of lake trout predating on burbot. That was solely a reflection of regulation changes, outreach, anglers going out there and doing their part to keep them in check and at this sustained level. And what we expect to see is that trend to continue to decline as those lake trout that we talked about, that grew up with burbot, start figuring them out more as a food source and are helping us to suppress them even further.
I think is that.
That is the last slide.
So we'll come back to the full screen here. You guys can all, check out our beauty here. We'll go see if there's any questions here. So we're approaching an hour and a half. So we got, we'll cut it off here at 7:30. It's at 7:18. So we'll, if you guys have, questions to what you've seen, go ahead and we'll give you guys a brief amount of time to post them up here if you have any questions. I do want to announce that the winner last week for the $50 Shields gift card was Rich Butler. So Rich Butler, we'll get your information, but congrats, you're the winner of the $50 Shields gift card giveaway that we did last week. But I want to take a moment, while we let these guys get caught up and everything, and thank you guys for coming and being a part of the show. I hope it means a lot to the people watching out there to see that you guys, were willing to come on a live show. And, the only thing we really had scripted was just the PowerPoint presentation being there. We just kind of walked through the data, walked through pictures, kind of walked through information with everybody. And, it's just information, so, we encourage you guys, if you have questions or anything like that, you guys have, meetings and stuff that are posted. I don't know if you do them every year, but I've seen them where the public can go. So, that's an opportunity for you guys to go and ask questions and talk about stuff. And just like this is, if you're watching and you're not sure about something or have a question, and John and Keith are here and, they're here now. And, there's not a lot of agencies that would be willing to come and just kind of be on the spot. So I want to thank you guys for, agreeing to doing that. I know Rob had his doubts, but he's still
all
alive.
kinds of confidence.
He's still alive over there. We haven't harassed him too bad.
And people need to know that we're available most days, except for when we're in the field, but give us a call. We field a lot of calls throughout the year, anglers with this whole spectrum of different questions. We're happy to talk to people. If people want to come in and visit with us, we can schedule a time to sit down with them. If they just want to walk in and we're sitting there in the office working, we go downstairs, talk to people on a regular basis. So we're available. We work for the public. We work for the resource, and we try to do our best to get it right. That's our goal.
See, I think we got a couple questions. What's the answer for the guys that just don't keep fish?
If you don't like to eat fish, harvest them, flay them nicely, vacuum seal them. Your neighbors, your friends, you're going to find that people are going to come out of the woodwork that are going to be happy to take lake trout off your hands.
So we got another one here. Tyson said, I'm new to fishing Flaming Gorge. Is it normal for Kokanee to not school up every year? Last year we were finding schools of little Lakers and not Kokanee.
That was definitely a concern last year. The Kokanee seemed to be in places that they weren't previous years. And so all of us are kind of like traditional, like, oh, it's May, so we go to this spot and fish. And it's June, oh, we go to this spot and fish. And the Kokanee weren't there because they were in other places. Another thing that was a bit alarming to me last year is the Kokanee fishing I did get in, there were proportionally more 4-year-old Kokanee, so 20, 19 and a half, 20, 21-inch fish that I was catching than I have in previous years. And that's concerning to me because that suggests that possibly those 3-year-old fish, which should be the dominant year class in any given year, weren't there. They're not out there. Where are they? Is it predation has already caught up with us? I don't know. We'll learn more when we net, but it's that's a concern, and that's the reason we need to keep up with the harvest.
Yeah, and that brings up a good point too. Is these regulations and these pup limits and stuff like that. If things keep going, regulations could change. For the better as we start seeing improvements. And you guys are actually finishing up a study right now, and so for people that are wondering, we saw these studies, but they were 10 years old. Well, there's another study that you guys are conducting right now that's nearing its completion, and there's no definitive answers, but there's some preliminary stuff that you had mentioned, but hopefully that gives us and you guys a really good 50,000 foot view, right, of what is going on at the lake.
Yeah, there's a lot of projects, and we've kind of talked about it already too, how we're here talking about primarily lake trout, but yet we can't help but talk about kokanee. We can't help but talk about burbot. I mean, a lot of these species are just intertwined, and that's the same thing with our research. I mean, we can do a lot of research on lake trout specifically. We get those answers, and then the results show us, man, now we've got more questions about what's happening with interactions with this species, which is a whole other project.
Yep.
So, we have completed, and there is our grad student's completed. He did a master's project on kokanee on Flaming Gorge. Are they hatchery fish out there, or are they wild fish or natural fish? Those results are out there, and it was a really productive study that people should take some time and research on and read up on it.
Where can they find that?
Oh, they'll have to Google it, but it should be available
Okay.
in some like nationwide libraries and things, and we even post them on our Game and Fish website, which would maybe be the easier place to find it.
Because I know there was a question, where can people go to look at your netting results that you do, if that's available to the public?
That is all public
Available
information, and that one's housed at the Wyoming library, if I remember correctly, which should have an online search function. But other research that we have, we're looking at lake trout food web ecology, which will be wrapping up here pretty shortly. Hopefully in the next few months we'll have some finished products that we can share with the public. And we have our juvenile lake trout that we shot some figures from, that we should have also finished products from this summer. And then we're working towards doing a lake trout population estimate, and people are going to see us a whole lot in coming years for doing another creel survey. So we've got a lot of projects going on that are going to help us fill in a lot of this information so we can have newer and better information to base all of our decisions on, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to use the information that we have to make the best decision that we can, and that's why we're doing this work, is make better decisions to help the fishery down the road.
And we had Jim had a question on how often do you do your netting surveys? Is it every year, every other year, a couple times a year?
It is every year. I mean, the first figure that we saw there, that's every year. There was, I mean, basically been done the same way every single year too, the same sites. Between all the sampling that we do on an annual basis, between us and Utah, we're looking at 6 weeks solid of just effort on the gorge. But there's a lot of other waters in the region that we have to go and spend our time in because there's not very many people in the region to go out and do that work. So we get spread pretty thin, but the gorge does get a substantial amount of our time every year. And that's not including time spent on other projects that we try to go out and do sampling for. That's just sampling that happens every single year. So we can get that trend data and have something to compare to.
See, I think, look at the time here. We got one last question here. Maybe it's not a question. Nope, Nick just says, cool to see the data. Thanks for putting the show together, Shane. Well, couldn't have done it without these two right here. Rob and John done most of the legwork, all the legwork as far as the PowerPoint presentation goes, and explaining that for us. So I am just a means for you guys to talk to the public. So it's showing, everybody does their part, right? We can all work together and accomplish stuff and get stuff done. That's, what we've done all of human history, essentially, right? For our good and bad reasons. But let's see, got one question here. What about unlimited on small lake trout, 16 to 24 inches for the next 2 or 3 years? I think you're waiting to kind of see what that new data is like before you make any decisions like that.
Right.
So I hope that answers your question, Gary. But, essentially they're looking at, the data that's coming in their most recent study and kind of going from there. So
and we're looking at all the options, but really 12 fish per day, 24 in possession approaches, it isn't unlimited, but for some people, for me, it approaches unlimited because that's about, if I'm lucky, that on a good day, that's about what I'll catch.
Yeah, so. I mean, if you got, a family of, 4 or 5, you're looking at 120, 130 fish. I mean, you're gonna be eating fish for, for a while. And one last point here, because we had a little bit of a problem with this in the tournaments, and I'll briefly touch on tournaments. You guys are going to start seeing, a switch in tournament dynamics here that are going to be more geared towards that age, that size class of fish coming up here. You're going to start seeing, more prize money going into, the biggest lake trout under a certain inch size. Kind of like you guys that fish the Granby tournament in Colorado, ice fishing, the Three Lakes tournament up there, which is, it's a 3-day tournament where the biggest lake trout under 19 inches or 19 inches and less wins money every day. And so that makes it really easy for anybody to go do. And then you're looking at a numbers thing again, bringing in more people. So you're going to start seeing changes to some of the tournaments going on out here, especially the ones that we're doing out here at Buckboard. But with that being said, these are still game fish, and you can't just throw them on the side of the road.
Right, and that was the population domination, which I really appreciate Tony and Jen putting that on, and TJ here at Buckboard. Opportunity to educate people about what we've been talking about today, but also an opportunity to remove a pretty significant number of small fish that weekend. But unfortunately, we had at least 2 teams that just discarded their fish. That's illegal. If we catch them, they're going to get a big ticket for that. It's pretty darn expensive. That is not the intent of these derbies. The intent is for people to come have fun, possibly win some money, get these fish, take them home, process them properly, eat them themselves, share them with their friends, whomever, but not be discarding them like that. That's just disrespectful, and we'll be moving forward on these contests with small lake trout, we're going to have be encouraging the sponsors to have basically a sheet where the participants are acknowledging that they understand that they're sport fish. They understand that they're valued in the registration process.
So that's going to be it for tonight's show. A lot of great information. There's plenty of stuff that you guys can go on and Google and find information on. You have the Western Lake Trout Woe study that you can Google and find. There's another one here, Investigations of Forest Fish and Lake Trout for Flaming Gorge, which goes over a bunch of different stuff. There's Q&As on the Wyoming Game and Fish website that you can go look at for lake trout. If you're in the area at Buckboard, Marina here at Flaming Gorge, any one of us that are here, will go, and talk to you about any of this stuff. So there's plenty of information out there. Just try to educate yourselves, out there, just like anything else. Try to do a little bit of research before you start, putting up negative comments. We're not looking at what happened in the past. We're looking at the future because, for our kids or even for yourself down the road, if you want to continue to enjoy the fishery, we all have to do our part and, participate in these creel surveys, go to the meetings for Game and Fish, do your part. Don't just sit there and play around on the internet and be a keyboard warrior. Put your money where your mouth is and, do your part. And that's, if we all do that, we can all enjoy the continuation of an amazing fishery. So with that being said, thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you next week.